The train rolled slowly through the countryside of Virginia, its whistle echoing faintly across the quiet fields. Inside one of the cars sat Ethan Miller, a man in his mid-30s with weathered hands and tired eyes. He had returned home after years in uniform, carrying medals that glittered less than the memories that haunted him. For the world outside, the war was long over. For him, it never truly ended. Ethan had served as a combat engineer in Afghanistan, but he had never fought alone. Beside him in dusty streets and hidden alleys had been his partner, a German shepherd named Ranger. Together, they had saved lives, sniffing out explosives before they could destroy convoys or marketplaces. Ethan often joked that Ranger had sharper instincts than most soldiers in his unit. Yet behind the humor lay an unbreakable bond forged in fire, sweat, and silent understanding. Now, years later, Ethan sat by the window of the train, watching autumn leaves swirl in the wind. The golden colors reminded him of late patrols, when dust clouds caught the sunset and made the desert look almost peaceful. He gripped the edge of his seat, torn between relief at being back on American soil and the gnawing emptiness of knowing that Ranger was not with him. "Excuse me, sir. Do you need anything?" The voice of the train attendant broke his thoughts. She offered a polite smile, balancing a tray of coffee. "No, thank you," Ethan replied softly, adjusting the worn cap on his head. His voice carried a heaviness she noticed but did not question. People often saw the uniform before they saw the man. As the train pulled into the small station of his hometown, Ethan took a deep breath. The platform was nearly empty, only a handful of families greeting loved ones. He stepped onto the concrete duffel bag slung over his shoulder and felt the cool air brush against his face. The smell of fresh earth, gasoline from the parked trucks, and fried food drifting from a nearby diner wrapped around him like a forgotten embrace. A group of teenagers glanced at him, whispering, "That's Ethan Miller. He's the one who served overseas." Respect was etched in their tone, but also a distance. They knew his name, maybe his story, but not the silence that followed him home. As he walked toward the parking lot, Ethan thought of Ranger once more. He remembered the dog's steady eyes during night patrols, the warmth of his fur when he pressed close for reassurance, the bark that had warned them of danger more than once. That dog had not been just a partner, he had been family. And now, somewhere out there, Ranger was living a life Ethan could only imagine. Was he safe? Was he cared for? Or had he been forgotten like so many veterans felt after their service ended? The questions gnawed at him, sharper than the ache in his knees from years of carrying heavy gear. He paused beside his truck, staring at the worn paint and cracked windshield. The vehicle looked tired, much like him, but it was still standing. He placed his bag in the back and leaned against the door. The world seemed quieter here, too quiet. The silence of small-town America was meant to soothe, yet it only made the echoes of gunfire in his mind louder. He rubbed his temples and whispered, almost as if Ranger could hear across the miles, "Where are you, buddy?" That emptiness had followed him for years, but on this day, something inside Ethan shifted. A sense that the story between him and Ranger wasn't finished, that somehow their paths would cross again. He didn't know when or how, but he held on to that thread of hope like a lifeline. Before diving into that journey, let me pause and invite you. If you believe in stories of loyalty, second chances, and the healing power of love, make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss what comes next. This journey is only beginning, and I promise it will touch your heart. Ethan climbed into his truck, started the engine, and drove down the familiar road leading into town. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the fields. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, unaware that soon the silence of his days would be broken in the most unexpected way. And it all started with the memory of a dog he could never forget. The first weeks back in his hometown felt strange for Ethan Miller. The streets were familiar, lined with old brick shops and the American flags that waved from porches, yet they seemed quieter than he remembered. Life here had kept moving while he was gone, and he felt like a man trying to fit into shoes that no longer belonged to him. He rented a small house on the edge of town, a place with peeling paint and creaking floorboards, but it offered privacy. Mornings were spent sitting on the porch with black coffee, staring across the empty fields. The silence, meant to comfort, only brought back echoes of things he wanted to forget. Helicopters overhead, boots crunching on gravel, Ranger's sharp bark cutting through the desert night. At the diner downtown, people welcomed him warmly, shaking his hand and offering free pie. "Glad you're back, Ethan," they'd say. But beneath the smiles lingered an invisible gap. They couldn't understand the weight he carried. Veterans like him were thanked for their service, but rarely asked about the nights they woke in sweat or the guilt of comrades lost. One evening, as he sipped coffee at the diner counter, Mrs. Jenkins, the owner, approached him with her usual bright smile. "You look tired, Ethan," she said gently. "Everything all right?" He forced a polite nod. "I'm fine. Just adjusting." Her eyes softened. "You don't have to go through it alone, you know. This town cares about you." He appreciated her words, yet they bounced off the walls he had built around himself. It wasn't loneliness exactly. It was the absence of something he couldn't replace. Ranger had been more than a dog. He had been his anchor. In combat, Ethan had trusted Ranger more than he trusted his own instincts. Now, waking up without him felt like waking without a part of himself. At night, the house grew unbearably still. The ticking clock echoed like gunfire. Shadows stretched across the walls, and Ethan would jolt awake, convinced he heard barking outside. Sometimes he sat on the porch until dawn, replaying missions in his mind. Ranger leading the way, tail low, ears alert. Ranger saving lives. Ranger staying calm when Ethan himself had been close to breaking. During the day, he tried to reconnect with people. He visited his parents, helped his younger brother fix a fence, even attended Sunday service at the local church. But in every gathering he felt slightly apart, like a guest in his own life. Neighbors were kind but cautious, unsure of how to treat him. Veterans carried an invisible badge that others respected but could not read. One afternoon, his friend Mark, who had also served overseas, stopped by. Mark had managed to find steady work in construction, though the war still showed in his eyes. They sat in the backyard, sipping cold beers, the late sun washing the grass in gold. "You ever think about it?" Ethan asked, staring at the horizon. "Think about what?" "Everything, over there. What it took. What we left behind." Mark sighed, setting down his bottle. "Every damn day, but I try not to let it eat me alive. Gotta keep moving, you know?" Ethan nodded, but movement wasn't the problem. It was direction. Without Ranger, he felt like a compass spinning aimlessly. Later that night, after Mark left, Ethan found himself kneeling by his bed, staring at the empty floor beside it. He could almost see Ranger curled there, ears twitching in sleep, ready to leap up at the slightest command. He whispered into the dark, voice cracking, "Wish you were here, buddy." The truth was unavoidable. Coming home had not healed him. It had only deepened the sense that something vital was missing. He needed to find a way forward, but he didn't yet know where that road began. And though he tried to bury the thought, a quiet question kept pressing at his heart. What if Ranger was still out there waiting too? The chill of early November had settled over town when Ethan Miller received a call that would stir something he thought he had lost. Hope. The day had started like any other, with him sitting at the diner, nursing a cup of bitter coffee. He watched cars pass along Main Street, each one a reminder of how ordinary life moved on for everyone else. His own life, however, felt stuck, circling the same restless thoughts. The phone buzzed against the counter. The number was unfamiliar, but something in his gut told him to answer. "Hello?" Ethan said, his voice cautious. "Is this Sergeant Ethan Miller?" a man's voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name's Tom Alvarez. I run a small shelter over in Franklin County. I got your contact from a veterans group. You've been asking about retired K9 dogs?" Ethan straightened in his seat, heart thudding. "That's right. I've been trying to track down my old partner, Ranger. Haven't had much luck." "Well," Tom said, "I can't promise anything. But a few weeks back, someone reported a German Shepherd, about 8 or 9 years old, wandering near their property. Matches the kind of description you gave. Strong build, scar over the left ear. Sound familiar?" Ethan froze. He could see Ranger in his mind. The scar was from shrapnel, a wound that healed but never disappeared. His voice cracked as he whispered, "That's him." "That has to be him." "I can't say for sure," Tom continued, "but the dog was seen again, this time chained up in someone's yard outside town. Thought you'd want to know." Ethan gripped the phone tighter. The diner suddenly felt too small, every sound muffled except Tom's words. He hadn't felt this rush of adrenaline since his last mission overseas. "Where exactly?" Ethan asked, his tone urgent. Tom gave him the location, a residential neighborhood about an hour's drive away. "Look, I don't know the details. Could be the same dog, could not. But you should check it out. If it's yours, well, he deserves to be with you." Ethan swallowed hard. "Thank you, Tom. You have no idea what this means." After hanging up, Ethan sat frozen, the coffee growing cold in front of him. His chest was tight, emotions colliding, hope, fear, guilt. What if it really was Ranger? And if it was, why had he been left chained in someone's yard? The thought made Ethan's stomach churn. Mark happened to walk into the diner just then, spotting Ethan's pale expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Mark said, sliding onto the stool beside him. "Maybe I have," Ethan muttered. Then he looked his friend in the eye. "I think someone found Ranger." Mark blinked, then let out a low whistle. "No way." "After all this time?" Ethan nodded, gripping the counter. "I got a call from a shelter guy. Said there's a German shepherd that matches Ranger's description, scar and everything." Mark leaned closer. "So what are you waiting for?" "Go find him." The simplicity of his words struck Ethan. What was he waiting for? The possibility of disappointment? The pain of finding out it wasn't Ranger at all? But what if it was him, and Ethan let the chance slip by? He rose from his seat, tossing cash on the counter. His hands trembled as he grabbed his jacket. "I have to know," Ethan said, more to himself than anyone else. Mark clapped him on the shoulder. "Then go. And if you need backup, you know where to find me." As Ethan walked to his truck, the crisp wind cut against his face. His pulse raced like it had in combat, only this mission was more personal than anything he had ever faced. The old Chevy roared to life, engine sputtering but steady. He gripped the wheel, the road stretching ahead like a line between despair and hope. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like he had a purpose again, and with that single lead, his journey to find Ranger truly began. The drive out to Franklin County felt longer than an hour. Ethan gripped the steering wheel, as if the strength of his hands alone could push the truck faster. The road stretched ahead in winding curves, flanked by fields of harvested corn and scattered barns. A pale sun hung low in the sky, and every mile carried the weight of memories he hadn't touched in years. His mind kept circling back to Ranger, how the dog's ears would perk up at the sound of approaching danger, how he would sit perfectly still until Ethan gave the command to move. Now the possibility of seeing him again was almost too much to process. Excitement tangled with dread. What if Tom had been wrong? What if the dog chained in that yard wasn't Ranger at all? Ethan's chest tightened at the thought. He tried to steady his breathing, reminding himself that he had to see it through no matter what waited at the end of the road. Halfway there, his phone buzzed. It was Mark. "You heading over already?" Mark asked. "Yeah," Ethan replied, eyes on the road. "Couldn't sit still, I need to know." Mark was quiet for a moment before saying, "Listen, man, don't get your hopes too high. I want it to be Ranger as much as you do, but if it's not—" "I know," Ethan cut in. "I've thought about that, but I can't just sit around wondering. If there's even a chance it's him, I have to try." Mark's voice softened. "Then do what you need to do and call me after, no matter what happens." "Will do." Ethan ended the call, pushing the accelerator a little harder. By the time he reached the edge of Franklin County, the sun had dipped behind the hills, leaving streaks of orange and pink across the horizon. He followed Tom's directions carefully, turning down smaller and smaller roads until the houses grew farther apart. The neighborhood wasn't run down, but it wasn't thriving either. Old pickup trucks sat rusting in driveways, and chain-link fences bordered patchy lawns. Ethan slowed as he neared the address Tom had given him. His pulse quickened, each beat loud in his ears. He scanned the yards, looking for any sign of movement. Then he saw it, a dark figure near the back of a property, just beyond a sagging wooden fence. His heart nearly stopped. The dog was lying down, chained to a post, its fur matted and dull under the dimming light. Even from a distance, Ethan could tell the animal looked thin, ribs pressing against its sides. The sight made his stomach twist with anger and sorrow. He parked a few houses down, not wanting to draw immediate attention, and walked slowly along the sidewalk. His boots crunched against gravel, his breaths shallow. When he drew closer, the dog lifted its head. Ethan's chest clenched as he caught sight of the familiar scar along the ear. "Ranger," he whispered, the name trembling off his lips. The dog tilted its head slightly, ears twitching at the sound, but did not move closer. Ethan could barely breathe. Every part of him wanted to run forward, to throw his arms around that dog, but something in his gut told him to hold back, to move carefully. A porch light flicked on and Ethan froze. A man stepped outside, cigarette glowing between his fingers. He didn't notice Ethan yet, but the sight of the homeowner stirred another rush of tension. Ethan wasn't ready for confrontation. Not yet. He took a step back, heart racing. He had found Ranger. He was sure of it now. But recognition, reunion, and everything that came after, those battles were still ahead. For tonight, one truth burned brighter than the fading light in the sky. Ethan was no longer searching in the dark. He had found his first breakthrough. Ethan barely slept that night. The image of the dog chained to the post kept flashing in his mind, sharper than any dream. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the scar on the ear, the hollow look in those tired eyes. Morning light finally crept through the blinds, and he was already up, pacing the kitchen. His stomach churned, his hands restless. Today, he would go back. The drive felt heavier than the night before. With the sun fully risen, everything appeared more vivid. The peeling paint on the houses, the faint smell of wood smoke in the air, the cracked asphalt stretching toward the neighborhood where the dog waited. Each mile carried both hope and fury. How could anyone leave a dog, let alone one who had served chained and neglected? When he turned onto the street, his throat tightened. The house looked ordinary, with a sagging porch and weeds pushing through the yard, but his eyes locked instantly on the backyard, where the dog sat in the same place as yesterday. The chain glinted under the sunlight, taut and unforgiving. Ethan parked at the curb, heart pounding. He forced himself to breathe slowly before stepping out of the truck. The cool air hit his face, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. He walked toward the fence, each step heavy with anticipation. Up close, the sight hit him like a punch. Ranger, or what had to be Ranger, was thinner than he remembered, fur dulled by neglect. His paws were dirty, and his once proud stance seemed broken, as if the chain had drained the life out of him. Still, there was something unmistakable in the way the dog lifted his head, something Ethan had known better than his own reflection. "Ranger," Ethan called softly, voice breaking. The dog stiffened, ears twitching. For a moment, he didn't move, eyes cautious and clouded with confusion. Then came a low growl, defensive, uncertain. Ethan's chest ached. It wasn't anger he heard. It was fear. Fear born from abandonment. "Easy, buddy," Ethan whispered, taking a slow step closer. "It's me. It's Ethan." The chain rattled as the dog shifted, pulling slightly back before lowering his head again. Ethan knelt near the fence, his knees pressing into the damp grass. His hands shook as he pressed them against the wooden slats, trying to keep his emotions contained. Memories crashed over him. Nights in Afghanistan when Ranger had curled up beside him in the dirt. Missions where the dog had alerted him to danger before any man could. This wasn't just a dog in a yard. This was his partner, his family. "God, what did they do to you?" Ethan muttered under his breath, fury simmering beneath his grief. The back door creaked open, and Ethan jolted to his feet. A man stepped onto the porch, cigarette dangling from his lips, eyes narrowing as he spotted Ethan near the fence. "Can I help you?" the man asked sharply. Ethan swallowed hard, forcing his voice steady. "That dog, where did you get him?" The man shrugged, exhaling smoke. "Found him wandering a while back. Figured he'd make a good guard dog." "Why?" Ethan's jaw clenched. He wanted to shout, to demand the chain be cut right then and there, but he held himself back. One wrong move and this could end badly. "He's not just a stray," Ethan said firmly. "That's a service dog. My partner from the army." The man raised a skeptical eyebrow. "That's so? Well, looks like he's mine now. Looks. He's on my property, isn't he?" Ethan's fists tightened at his sides, anger threatening to spill over, but he couldn't risk it. Not yet. He had to think, to find a way. He looked once more at Ranger, who now stared back with a flicker of recognition in his eyes. And in that moment Ethan knew this wasn't just about finding Ranger, it was about fighting for him. Ethan stood frozen, torn between fury at the man's words and the desperate pull of the dog behind the fence. The cigarette smoke drifted in the cool air, bitter on his tongue. Ranger shifted uneasily, eyes darting between the two men. The growl had faded, but his body remained tense, coiled like a spring waiting to snap. The homeowner flicked ash onto the porch railing. "You say he's yours?" "Prove it." Ethan's throat tightened. How could he prove years of shared missions, countless nights in the desert, the bond that had saved lives? Still, he knew one thing no one else did: the commands, the voice Ranger trusted. Slowly, he crouched again, ignoring the weight of the man's stare. "Ranger," Ethan called softly, the tone sharp but gentle, the way he had in Afghanistan. "Heel!" For a moment nothing happened. The dog blinked, ears twitching, then shifted forward, paws scraping the dirt. The chain rattled as he tugged, his body low, tail stiff. Ethan's chest tightened with hope and fear all tangled together. "Good boy," Ethan whispered, voice trembling. "It's me, buddy, it's Ethan, you remember, don't you?" The man on the porch scoffed. "He reacts to anyone who calls him. Don't think you're special." But Ethan wasn't listening. He steadied his breath and gave another command, one Ranger had followed 1,000 times. "Sit." The effect was immediate. Ranger dropped to the ground, eyes locked on Ethan's. His tail gave a hesitant wag, then another, faster this time. A whine escaped his throat, high-pitched and desperate, as if the weight of years had just broken open. Ethan's vision blurred with tears. "That's my boy," he choked out. "I knew you'd remember." The dog rose suddenly, straining against the chain, pawing the ground, whining louder. His body shook with the force of recognition, tail wagging furiously now. Ethan pressed his hand against the fence, and Ranger shoved his nose through the gap, licking frantically at his fingers. The homeowner frowned, his expression hardening. "Well, I'll be damned." Ethan looked up, voice sharp with emotion. "He knows me. He's not your guard dog, he's my partner. We served together. He saved lives." "And now you've got him chained up like some junkyard dog?" The man shifted uncomfortably, though he masked it with a shrug. "He was a stray when I found him. Didn't have a collar, no tags. Seemed like no one wanted him." "No one wanted him?" Ethan's voice cracked with disbelief. "That dog gave everything. He deserves more than a chain in the dirt." The man didn't answer right away. Ranger barked once, sharp and commanding, as if echoing Ethan's protest. The sound cut through the tension like a blade. Ethan leaned closer, stroking Ranger's muzzle through the gap. "I'm here now," Ethan whispered. "I should have found you sooner, but I won't walk away this time." For a moment the world seemed to shrink, just Ethan and Ranger, two soldiers reunited against all odds. The years apart fell away, leaving only the bond that had carried them through war. The smell of dirt and smoke, the ache in Ethan's chest, the warmth of Ranger's fur beneath his fingertips. It was all overwhelming, yet grounding. Behind him, the homeowner muttered something under his breath, but Ethan barely heard. Ranger's eyes, bright now with life, held him captive. The recognition was undeniable, powerful enough to silence doubt. Ethan knew the battle for Ranger wasn't over, but he also knew something had shifted. Ranger remembered him. That alone was victory. And as Ranger pressed harder against the fence, whining and wagging, Ethan vowed silently, whatever it took, he would bring his partner home. Ethan drove home that evening with his chest burning. Ranger had remembered him, no doubt about it. The recognition had been too strong, too real to deny. but the image of the chain clamped around his partner's neck wouldn't leave his mind. Every rattle of it still echoed in his ears, mixing with the homeowner's smug tone. Ethan had fought battles in deserts thousands of miles away, but now he faced a new one in his own country. The next morning he called the county sheriff's office. His voice was firm, steady, but underneath anger trembled. "This is Sergeant Ethan Miller. I've located my former K9 partner, Ranger. He's being kept in neglectful conditions. I want to report it." The officer on the line hesitated. "Do you have proof of ownership, sir? Papers, adoption documents, anything like that?" Ethan swallowed. He had the deployment photos, commendations, even the scars to prove their service together, but not the paperwork. The army had retired Ranger without consulting him, sending the dog into the labyrinth of rehoming policies. "I have military records," Ethan said. "I can show you pictures of us deployed. That dog is mine in every way that matters." "Sir," the officer replied carefully, "I don't doubt your bond, but legally, we need more than photos. If the current owner has possession and claims the dog, this could end up in court." Court. The word dropped like lead. Ethan thanked the officer and hung up, pressing his hand against his forehead. He had thought finding Ranger would be the hardest part. Now it seemed the real fight was just beginning. Later, he met Mark at the diner. His friend leaned across the booth, eyes narrowed. "So what now?" "They say it's about paperwork," Ethan muttered bitterly. "As if documents can define what Ranger and I have been through." Mark tapped his fingers on the table. "You need help. People who can back you up, who can testify. You can't fight this alone." Ethan nodded slowly. Mark was right. This wasn't Afghanistan, where instinct and grit were enough. Here, the battlefield was legal, and his weapons would have to be words, evidence, and allies. That afternoon, Ethan reached out to a local animal welfare group. He explained Ranger's service, his neglect, the chain in the backyard. The director, a stern woman named Carla Reed, listened intently. "I've seen this before," she said. "Dogs ending up in the wrong hands after service. It's tragic. If you're willing to fight for him, I'll help file the necessary complaints. But you should also consider getting legal representation." Ethan thanked her, a small flicker of hope returning. Maybe there were people who understood after all. That night, he searched through old boxes until he found the photographs. Ranger beside him in uniform, both of them standing proud against the backdrop of Afghan villages. He traced the edges of the photos with his fingers, remembering the dust, the sweat, the moments when Ranger's sharp bark had saved lives. These weren't just memories, they were evidence of a bond forged in service. Still, doubt gnawed at him. Would a judge even care? Would the law see Ranger as anything more than property? He leaned back in his chair, whispering into the quiet, "I won't let them keep you chained, buddy. Not after everything." The next day, Ethan began gathering statements. He called fellow soldiers, asking them to recount missions where Ranger had been vital. One by one they agreed, their voices filled with respect for the dog who had walked the line between life and death with them. By evening, Ethan felt a spark of determination he hadn't felt in years. The homeowner had the chain, the yard, and maybe even the paperwork. But Ethan had the truth, and a growing army of people ready to stand beside him. The battle ahead would be long and messy, but this time Ethan wasn't stepping onto the field alone. Ethan's mornings were filled with phone calls, friends, fellow veterans, anyone who might help him in his fight to bring Ranger home. The process was slow, and with each call, his frustration grew. Some people were sympathetic, but others just didn't understand the depth of the bond he shared with the dog. The worst were the ones who dismissed his plea as a lost cause, as if Ranger was just a dog, nothing more than a tool used in service. Still, there were allies too. Carla from the Animal Welfare Group had been invaluable, offering legal advice and guidance on how to navigate the murky waters of animal rights and ownership. She had helped him file the initial complaints, but the real work lay ahead. "Ethan," she said one afternoon over the phone, "I've contacted some people who have been in situations like yours. We can't guarantee anything, but we're doing what we can. If you want to make a case for Ranger, we need solid evidence and more witnesses." "I've got the pictures and testimonies from the guys who served with him," Ethan replied, trying to steady his nerves. "But it's not enough." "I need something more." "I understand," Carla said. "You might need a lawyer. I'll help you with that. But just remember, don't give up. The law is on your side, but it's slow and sometimes frustrating." The frustration was starting to show. Ethan's sleep was erratic. Each day bled into the next, filled with phone calls, paperwork, and emails. The small town of Franklin County, once peaceful and familiar, felt like a battleground. At the same time, the homeowner was becoming more resistant. Ethan had called him several times, trying to explain the situation, hoping for a peaceful resolution. But the man was firm, even dismissive. Every call ended the same way, with the homeowner insisting that Ranger was his dog now, that Ethan had no legal claim, and that he wasn't going to just give up a free guard dog. Ethan's frustration boiled over when he received a letter from the homeowner's lawyer, a formal document demanding that Ethan stay away and threatening legal action for harassment. He crumpled the letter in his hand, throwing it across the room. "He's not just a guard dog," Ethan muttered, pacing. "He's my partner. I won't let him be forgotten." Mark had been supportive, but even he couldn't offer much more than encouragement. "You've got a team now," Mark said one evening, sitting on the porch with Ethan as the stars blinked overhead. "I know it feels like a fight you can't win, but you're not doing this alone. People are noticing." Ethan nodded, though the weight of it all still bore down on him. The legal battle was far from over, and the resistance was stronger than ever. The homeowner wasn't just refusing to let go of the dog. He was digging in his heels, determined to keep Ranger, no matter what. But Ethan knew something the homeowner didn't. Ranger wasn't just a dog. He wasn't just a piece of property. He was family, a family that had fought together, bled together, and survived together. And no matter how many obstacles the man threw in his way, Ethan wouldn't stop until Ranger was safe. The weeks dragged on, and it seemed like the more allies Ethan gathered, the more resistance he met. But deep inside, he felt a fire building, a sense that this fight was bigger than just a legal battle. It was a fight for something real, something that couldn't be measured in paperwork. "I'm not letting go, buddy," he whispered to the empty room, as if Ranger could hear. "Not now, not ever." The days were starting to blur together. Ethan's routine had become a cycle of phone calls, paperwork, and late-night sessions at his kitchen table, his mind racing with everything he needed to do to win Ranger back. But amid the chaos, memories of their time together began to resurface, flashes of moments when Ranger had saved his life. Those memories were both a comfort and a burden, reminding him of the stakes in this fight. Ethan sat in his small living room, the same room he had returned to after his deployment. The walls, bare except for a few mementos of his time in the army, felt cold and empty. Yet as he closed his eyes, he could almost see Ranger lying at his feet, the dog's calm presence grounding him in the madness of war. His mind wandered back to one of their most dangerous missions, deep in the mountains of Afghanistan. The sun had barely risen that day, and the air was thick with the heat of the desert. Ethan, along with his unit, was walking down a narrow path when Ranger had suddenly stopped, his ears perking up. "Hold," Ranger's handler, Sergeant Lewis, ordered as he raised his hand. Ethan, who had been walking point, stopped dead in his tracks, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. Ranger's body was tense, his nose working the air as if something was wrong. "Clear," Ethan had whispered, but just as he spoke, the ground beneath them shifted. The sound of a distant explosion echoed, followed by the unmistakable rattle of gunfire. Ranger had reacted immediately, his instincts kicking in. Without hesitation, he'd bolted toward the source of the sound, his speed and agility unmatched. Ethan had no choice but to follow, trusting the dog more than anyone else. Ranger led them directly to a hidden IED, one that would have taken out half the squad had it detonated. It was moments like that, those quiet exchanges in the chaos of war, that made Ethan realize how deeply Ranger had become a part of him. The dog had saved lives, including his own, and they had fought side by side in a world of endless danger. As Ethan sat on the couch, staring at the framed photograph of the two of them, Ranger's alert gaze piercing through the lens, he felt the weight of the years that had passed since that mission. The dog had been by his side, through the darkest moments of his life, and in return, Ethan had promised to never let him go. But now it felt like the promise was slipping away. The phone buzzed, dragging Ethan from his thoughts. It was Carla, the animal welfare advocate. "Ethan, I've got good news," she said, her voice crackling slightly through the line. "The court date is set. We're moving forward with the case." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "When?" "Next week," Carla replied. "We've gathered everything we need. Your fellow soldiers have given their statements, and I've filed the official complaints with the county. We have a good shot at this." "Next week," Ethan repeated, his thoughts racing. This was it. The battle was finally going to a courtroom. But as the excitement swirled within him, a shadow of doubt lingered in the back of his mind. He remembered the fear he'd seen in Ranger's eyes when they were separated, the way the dog had trembled in the cold backyard. Was the fight worth it? Would Ranger even recognize him after all this time? He shook his head, trying to dispel the fear. "I can't lose him again," he muttered under his breath. "I can't." The fight had only just begun. But one thing was clear. Ethan would not let the bond he shared with Ranger be erased by a legal system that failed to see the depth of their connection. The memories were alive in him, pushing him forward. And with that resolve, he stood, ready to face whatever came next. As the court date loomed closer, the tension in Franklin County grew palpable. What had once been a quiet, sleepy town was now divided. People were talking, whispers at the grocery store, conversations at the post office, and heated debates over dinner tables. Ethan's fight to bring Ranger home was no longer just his own. It had become a local issue, a moral battleground that stirred deep emotions. Some people rallied behind him, moved by his determination and the undeniable bond between a soldier and his dog. They saw the loyalty, the shared history, and they felt his pain. "That dog deserves better than a backyard chain," a local vet, Dr. Sullivan, told a reporter. "We all owe something to the animals who served our country, and I stand by Ethan." Ethan could feel the weight of the support as it flooded in. It was humbling, but it also made the stakes higher. The more people who became involved, the more pressure there was on him to win. Not just for himself, but for Ranger and for the community that believed in the cause. But for every person who stood by him, there was another who stood against him. "You can't just take someone's property because you have a sentimental attachment to it," said the town's local attorney, Mark Henderson. He was well known in the community, a lawyer who prided himself on the principle of property rights. "The law doesn't care about your feelings. It's about ownership. And right now that dog belongs to someone else." The words stung, but Ethan didn't let them show. Instead, he focused on the support that was pouring in from his fellow veterans. They shared their own stories, similar to his. Dogs they had fought with, lost and never gotten back. Some had been lucky enough to adopt their canines when they retired, but many hadn't. Now they were all standing with him, writing letters, showing up at rallies and speaking out. "I've seen a lot of things in my time, but nothing hit me like this," said one of his old squad mates, Jake, at a local event. "Ranger's not just a dog, he's a brother, and if Ethan says he's his, then that's good enough for me." But there were others who saw it differently. The homeowner, a man named Rick Carter, had his supporters as well. "It's just a dog. Why should we make such a big deal about this?" one of his neighbors remarked, shaking his head. "They're both adults. Ethan should move on. The dog's fine where he is." The divide ran deeper than just the legal battle. It was a clash of values. For Ethan, this wasn't just about paperwork or ownership. It was about justice, loyalty, and the bond forged through years of shared sacrifice. But for some, it was a matter of personal property, plain and simple. The tension in town reached a breaking point one afternoon when a protest organized by Ethan's supporters marched through Main Street. There were signs, flags, and heartfelt chants calling for Ranger's return. It was peaceful at first, but the atmosphere was charged. As the crowd reached the edge of the town square, a group of Rick Carter's supporters showed up. Their signs were sharply worded, dismissing the idea of military dogs as just animals. "Let it go, Miller," one of them yelled from across the street. "That dog isn't your family. He's a pet." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the two sides confront each other. But before the situation escalated, Mark, standing next to him, placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Don't do it, man," he said quietly. "This isn't the time. The judge will decide. Don't give them more ammo to work with." The protest fizzled out after a few tense moments, but the damage had been done. Ethan felt the weight of the divide. People who had known him for years were now looking at him with a mix of admiration, pity, or judgment. The rift in the community wasn't just about Ranger. It was about a deeper conflict over what mattered: ownership or loyalty, property or bond. As Ethan walked back to his truck, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. This wasn't just a fight for Ranger anymore. It had become something bigger, and the cost was becoming painfully clear. He wasn't just fighting for his dog. He was fighting to prove that some things were worth more than the law, more than property rights, more than anything else. And with every passing day he could feel the weight of that truth pressing on him, but he refused to back down. The courtroom was silent, save for the sound of rustling papers and the low murmur of the few gathered spectators. Ethan sat at the defendant's table, his hands clenched into fists, his gaze fixed ahead at the judge, who was reviewing the legal documents. The tension in the room was thick, palpable, as the fate of Ranger and his bond with Ethan hung in the balance. Ethan could feel the weight of every eye in the room, from the attorney seated next to him, to the audience in the back, to the opposing party, Rick Carter, the homeowner, and his lawyer. Ethan had prepared himself for this moment, but nothing could have prepared him for the storm of emotions that surged through him. Across the room, Rick sat with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. He had a smug air about him, as if he truly believed this was just a formality, a simple case of ownership. But for Ethan, it was everything. Ranger was more than just a dog to him. He was a partner, a hero, a piece of his soul. The lawyer for Rick stood up first, his voice cold and measured. "Your Honor, the defendant claims ownership of the dog in question, Ranger." However, there is no official documentation to support that claim. We have records indicating that this dog was a military asset, and once retired, it was rehomed under standard procedures. It was then legally adopted by Mr. Carter, who has cared for the dog for over 2 years. Ethan's stomach twisted as he listened to the lawyer's words. The lack of paperwork was the very thing he feared. The law was about ownership, not loyalty, not memories. It didn't care that Ranger had saved lives in Afghanistan, that he had served beside Ethan in the most dangerous of circumstances. The judge, a middle-aged man with a stern face, nodded slowly. "I understand the circumstances, Mr. Henderson. However, we must adhere to the laws of property ownership. I'm afraid that without substantial evidence proving ownership, we have no legal grounds to remove the dog from Mr. Carter's possession." Ethan's heart sank. It felt like a punch to the gut. He had spent months preparing for this day, gathering testimonies from fellow soldiers, reaching out to animal rights activists and doing everything he could to prove that Ranger belonged with him. But without the legal documentation, it was as if none of that mattered. His lawyer, a young woman named Sarah Whitman, rose to her feet. She had been the one to guide him through the legal maze, offering support when the road seemed impossible to navigate. She was no stranger to the fight for justice, and she wasn't about to back down now. "Your Honor," Sarah began, her voice calm but filled with conviction, "we are not here to dispute property rights, but rather to address the deeper issue at hand, the bond between a service member and his K-9 partner. My client, Sergeant Ethan Miller, served alongside Ranger for years. They shared not only a battlefield but also a deep, unbreakable connection. The law often fails to recognize the emotional and psychological impact that these animals have on the men and women who serve. The bond between them goes beyond ownership. It is a bond forged in war, in sacrifice, and in survival." Ethan could feel the eyes of the courtroom shift toward him as Sarah continued. He hadn't spoken much during the proceedings. His emotions had been too raw. But hearing Sarah's words stirred something inside him, a quiet resolve he had been holding on to. Ranger saved lives. He saved Ethan's life, and in return, Ethan never abandoned him. "That bond is undeniable," Sarah finished, her gaze meeting the judge's. "We ask that the court recognize that a dog who has served our country alongside its handler is more than property. He is a partner, and that partnership deserves to be honored. For a moment the room fell silent. Ethan's pulse thudded in his ears as he waited for the judge's response. The weight of the case felt like a crushing burden on his chest. The judge shifted in his seat, his fingers tapping against the desk. I understand the gravity of this case. I will review the testimonies and the evidence presented. A decision will be made at the next hearing. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The judge's words felt like a small victory, but it wasn't enough. The battle wasn't over yet. It wasn't over until Ranger was back by his side. As the proceedings came to a close, Ethan stood, his mind racing. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to give up. He couldn't. Ranger had been with him through the darkest times of his life, and he would fight until the very end to bring him home. The following week felt like an eternity. Ethan spent the days leading up to the next hearing in a haze, unable to focus on anything other than the court date. His mind kept replaying the words the judge had spoken in the last hearing. A decision will be made at the next hearing. Each time he heard those words in his head, a fresh wave of anxiety washed over him. The uncertainty of the situation gnawed at him. Ranger's absence was like a hole in his life, an emptiness that no amount of time or distractions could fill. Ethan's small house felt colder, quieter. Every corner seemed to echo with memories of the dog who had once filled it with energy and loyalty. He often found himself looking out the window, hoping to see the familiar figure of Ranger waiting for him, but the streets remained empty. Mark had been there for him, offering support when the weight of it all seemed too heavy to bear. "You've done everything you can, Ethan," he'd say, trying to lift his friend's spirits. "You've got people behind you. You're not in this alone." But even Mark's comforting words couldn't soothe the storm inside Ethan's mind. He knew the truth. No matter how much support he had, it wouldn't matter unless the judge ruled in his favor. The day of the hearing arrived, gray and overcast, as if the weather itself shared his unease. Ethan sat in the courtroom, his hands gripping the edge of the table as he tried to steady his breathing. His lawyer, Sarah, sat beside him, a quiet strength beside his own turmoil. The opposing lawyer, Rick's attorney, sat across from them, exuding confidence, his posture rigid. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Ethan felt his heart hammering in his chest as the judge sat down, scanning the room with a calm, measured gaze. There was no turning back now. After reviewing all the evidence and testimonies provided, the judge began, his voice echoing in the quiet room, "I've come to a decision. This case, while difficult, centers on the rights of an animal that has served our country, as well as the emotional bond shared between the handler and the service animal. It is clear that Sergeant Miller and Ranger share a bond that goes beyond ownership." Ethan held his breath. His heart seemed to stop as the judge paused, the weight of his words settling in the air. The judge continued, "It is not the court's role to diminish the importance of that bond. However, the law must also be adhered to. The current owner of the dog, Mr. Carter, legally adopted the animal when it was rehomed after retirement. According to property law, he does have rights to the dog." Ethan's stomach dropped. He could feel the room spinning, a wave of disappointment crashing over him. His mind raced, trying to process what was being said. This wasn't what he had hoped for. But then the judge spoke again, his tone shifting slightly. "However," he said, his voice more deliberate, "there is a special consideration in this case. The court acknowledges the unique circumstances surrounding the dog's service, as well as the compelling emotional testimony from the people involved. As such, while Mr. Carter has ownership rights, the court finds that the dog should be returned to Sergeant Miller under a temporary custody agreement while further discussions take place." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He could barely believe what he was hearing. The judge leaned forward, looking directly at Ethan. "Sergeant Miller, I'm ordering the temporary return of Ranger to your care. The final decision will be made at a later date, but I believe this interim arrangement is in the best interest of the animal and the bond you share." A wave of relief flooded through Ethan, so strong that it almost knocked him off his feet. He couldn't speak at first, couldn't even breathe. It was as if the weight of the past months had been lifted in an instant. The judge gave a nod, signaling the end of the hearing. Court is adjourned. As the room began to empty, Ethan found himself standing in a daze. Sarah was at his side, her face breaking into a wide, triumphant smile. "You did it," she said softly. Ethan couldn't find the words to respond. All he could think about was Ranger. He had a chance to bring him home, finally. "Thank you," he whispered to Sarah, his voice thick with emotion. Outside, the sun was breaking through the clouds, casting warm light over the courthouse steps. Ethan stepped out into the daylight, his heart still pounding, but this time with hope, not fear. He knew there was still more to come, there was still a final decision to be made. But for now, for the first time in months, Ethan allowed himself to smile. Ranger was coming home. And that was enough. Ethan sat in his truck, the engine idling in the driveway, but he couldn't bring himself to move. His heart raced as he stared at the front door, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Ranger was coming home. The courtroom had spoken, and for now the dog that had once saved his life was legally his again. It felt surreal, like the weight of months of uncertainty had finally lifted, but it left a strange emptiness, as if he was waiting for something to confirm that it was real. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the neighborhood, but Ethan barely noticed. His thoughts were fixed on the dog. Would Ranger remember him? Would he be as he was before, the same loyal, steadfast partner, or had too much time passed? He'd been counting down the days, the hours, the minutes, but now that the moment was here, it felt like too much. The memories of Ranger's barking, his comforting presence, all flooded back with a quiet intensity. Ethan's chest tightened, his fingers gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ethan took a deep breath and opened the door. The cool evening air hit him, but it wasn't enough to shake the tension in his bones. He walked to the house where Rick had kept Ranger, the once foreign place now somehow tethered to his past. The house looked ordinary from the outside, yet it felt like a battleground in Ethan's mind. He had been here before, standing outside, yearning for the reunion that had felt so out of reach. Today was different. Today, he would bring Ranger home. When Ethan knocked, the door opened almost immediately, and Rick stood there, his face unreadable. Ethan felt a flare of anger but quickly pushed it down. This wasn't the time for confrontation. The legal battle had been won, but that didn't mean the emotions were any less complicated. "Sergeant Miller," Rick said, his voice neutral, though there was an edge to it. "Mr. Carter," Ethan replied, forcing the words through clenched teeth. "I'm here to pick up Ranger." Rick hesitated for a moment, his gaze flicking toward the living room behind him. "I know the court ruled in your favor," he said, stepping aside, "but I want to make this clear. I've grown attached to that dog. He's been with me for over 2 years. Ethan's throat tightened, but he held his ground. "I understand, Mr. Carter. I don't want to take him from you. I just want to bring him home where he belongs." Rick stepped back, silently gesturing toward the backyard. The chain was gone now, but the familiar, faded doghouse still stood in the corner of the yard. Ethan felt his heart lurch as he saw Ranger standing there, his eyes fixed on the gate, waiting. Ethan approached slowly, the dog's ears twitching at his approach. Ranger's head tilted, the way it always did when he was unsure, but the recognition was there. Ethan's pulse quickened. "Ranger," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. The dog's tail gave a slow wag, hesitant at first, and then more sure, more eager. Ethan's heart swelled as Ranger stepped forward, then stopped just a few feet away, his eyes searching Ethan's face. It was as if he was waiting for confirmation, a sign that it was really him. "I'm here, buddy," Ethan said softly, kneeling down to be at eye level with the dog. The moment their eyes met, the years apart, seemed to dissolve. Ranger's tail began to wag faster, and before Ethan knew it, the dog was bounding toward him, his body tense with excitement. The dog's paws landed on Ethan's chest, knocking him backward, but he didn't care. He wrapped his arms around Ranger, pulling him close, feeling the warmth of his fur, the steady heartbeat beneath his skin. The dog's whine echoed in the quiet evening air as Ranger pressed his nose into Ethan's neck. The years of separation had melted away in that one moment, as if the universe had conspired to reunite them. Ethan held on tighter, closing his eyes and letting the tears fall freely. "I promised I'd come for you, didn't I, buddy?" Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not letting you go again." Behind him, Rick stood silently, watching the reunion unfold. There was no pride in his expression, no triumph, just a quiet acknowledgement of what had been and what had come to pass. As Ethan stood, Ranger following closely behind him, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The court had ruled, the fight was over, and he was walking out of this house with the dog he had lost, his partner, his friend, his family. The door closed behind them as Ethan and Ranger walked toward the truck. It was the beginning of something new, something that had been long overdue. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he could breathe again. And with Ranger by his side, he knew the future would be brighter. The days following Ranger's return felt like a dream. Ethan found himself waking up each morning to the sound of his own heartbeat and the soft breathing of the dog beside him. It had been so long since he had felt this kind of peace, the kind that settled deep in his bones and wrapped him in warmth. The house, once cold and empty, now felt alive with Ranger's presence. Ethan spent the next few days just being with Ranger, walking together in the morning mist, sitting on the porch as the sun set, letting the world pass by while they simply existed in each other's company. There were no more looming court dates, no more long, sleepless nights filled with uncertainty. The battle for Ranger was over, and now it was time to heal. But healing wasn't as simple as signing papers or leaving the courtroom. Ethan knew this. He had fought alongside Ranger through unspeakable pain and loss, and the scars from those years ran deep. So, while Ranger was physically back by his side, there was still a quiet battle inside Ethan. It was a battle to reconcile the memories of war with the quiet peace of civilian life. Ranger seemed to understand. Each time Ethan struggled, whether it was a flashback or a moment of overwhelming emotion, Ranger would be there, his head gently resting on Ethan's lap, eyes full of silent understanding. He didn't ask questions. He simply existed, just as he had in the war, providing comfort without the need for words. It wasn't always easy, though. There were moments when the memories of war hit Ethan like a wave. Flashbacks would come suddenly, loud noises, the pressure of the ground beneath him, the feeling of helplessness as chaos unfolded around him. It was in those moments that Ranger seemed to know exactly what to do. The dog would nudge him gently, guiding him back to the present. The rhythmic beat of Ranger's tail would calm Ethan's racing heart, grounding him back in the here and now. One afternoon, as Ethan sat in the backyard, watching the wind sweep through the tall grass, Ranger came and lay beside him. The dog had grown quieter in the past few days, as if he too was finding comfort in the return to normalcy. The stillness between them was a silence that spoke volumes. "I don't know how to thank you," Ethan whispered, his voice catching in his throat. He reached down to run his fingers through Ranger's fur, the familiar warmth of the dog's presence a balm to his soul. "You've been through so much, haven't you? I wasn't there for you when you needed me." "I'll never forgive myself for that." Ranger's eyes softened, and Ethan could almost feel the reassurance in the steady rhythm of his breathing. It was a wordless forgiveness that reached Ethan's heart. The bond between them was undeniable, something that transcended guilt and pain. They had saved each other more times than either of them could count. The memories of war still lingered, but they were no longer as sharp. As the days passed, Ethan began to feel like he was finally able to breathe again. He started seeing a therapist, taking steps to process the trauma that had once seemed insurmountable. Ranger's presence, always there beside him, helped him find the strength to face what he had been running from for so long. It wasn't easy, but it was a beginning. A new chapter in both their lives. Ethan often found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here, the endless fight for Ranger, the overwhelming emotions of courtrooms, the pain of separation. But in the quiet moments with Ranger by his side, all of that seemed far away. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was home, truly home. Ranger, too, seemed to be healing. The once tense dog was now more relaxed, his coat growing thicker and shinier, his eyes clearer, brighter. There was joy in the small things, The way his tail wagged when Ethan came through the door, the way he curled up beside him every night, offering silent comfort. Together they had been through the worst. And now together, they were learning how to live again. There was no perfect ending, no complete cure for the scars of war. But as Ethan looked down at Ranger, resting peacefully at his feet, he knew they had come as close to healing as they ever could. And that was enough. The morning light poured in through the window, casting soft shadows on the floor. Ethan stood at the kitchen counter, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand, his gaze distant as he watched Ranger lay sprawled on the rug in front of the fireplace. The dog's eyes were closed, his breathing slow and steady. It had been months since their reunion, and yet every day felt like a small miracle. Ethan took a sip from his cup and sighed, feeling the warmth spread through him. His life had changed in ways he never expected. When he first found out Ranger was out there, chained and forgotten, he never imagined that this moment would come, the quiet mornings, the peace they had found, the healing that had taken place between them. He wasn't naive enough to believe everything was fixed. The shadows of war still lingered in his mind, and there would be hard days ahead. But there was something different now, something that had shifted. He had his dog back, and more than that, he had his purpose. "Hey, buddy," Ethan said softly, looking down at Ranger, whose ears twitched in response. The dog opened one eye, then stood, stretching his long limbs before walking over to Ethan and leaning against his leg. "I'm sorry I was gone so long," Ethan murmured, his hand resting gently on Ranger's back. "I'll never leave you again." Ranger's eyes, full of unspoken understanding, met his, and for a moment it felt like everything made sense again. They had both been through hell and back, but together they had survived. Their bond was unbreakable, forged in the fires of war and strengthened by time apart. Ethan smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that hadn't crossed his face in years. "We're home now." Ranger gave a soft whine, nudging Ethan's hand, as if agreeing with him. And in that moment, as the sun began to rise higher, Ethan felt the weight of the past year lift just a little. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The road to healing had been long. There had been moments of doubt, moments where it felt like they might never get here. But now, with Ranger by his side, Ethan knew that they were ready to face whatever came next. The phone on the counter buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Sarah, his lawyer, updating him on the final legal proceedings, just a formality at this point. Ethan's gaze shifted to the phone, but his attention quickly returned to Ranger, lying contentedly at his feet. "Not today," Ethan whispered to himself. He didn't need to look at the legal documents or worry about the next hearing. Today he had his dog. For once everything felt right. No more waiting, no more fighting. Just two old friends healing together, moving forward, and finding peace in the quiet moments. The rest of the world could wait. "Thanks for sticking with me, buddy," Ethan said, bending down to scratch Ranger behind the ears. The dog's tail thumped softly against the floor in response. Ethan chuckled and stood, walking over to the window to watch the morning unfold. There was a whole world outside, a world full of challenges, but for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt ready to face it. With Ranger by his side, he knew they could handle whatever came next. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, Ethan knew one thing for sure. Their story wasn't over. It had only just begun.